Is there a more hated woman in Australia than Kathleen Folbigg? Over 10 years, one by one, she killed her 4 babies. Her crimes are so inconceivable, it's still hard to fathom how and why she did it. That is, until you consider this. Maybe Kathleen Folbigg was wrongly accused. She's always maintained her innocence, and tomorrow, a judicial inquiry reviewing her conviction begins. It might lead to her freedom after 15 years in prison. Hoping that's true is Carol Matthey. More than anyone, she knows what Kathleen's endured because, incredibly, she too was accused of murdering 4 of her babies. The 2 cases are remarkably similar, right down to the expert witnesses called upon to determine the truth. Yet, while Kathleen was convicted as Australia's worst female serial killer, the prosecution against Carol was thrown out.
And cameras rolling, so action.
Carol Matthey stands accused but never convicted of killing her 4 babies. While this mother believes she deserves overwhelming sympathy for her loss, instead she's dogged by suspicion that she killed them all. 4 murders in 5 years. This is the first time Carol's spoken publicly about the sudden deaths of her children. Sitting here opposite you today, I am looking at somebody who has suffered unimaginable grief and loss. Or I'm sitting opposite a deeply disturbed person who is capable of committing the most monstrous things, committing murder 4 times over. Who am I sitting opposite?
Someone dealing with unimaginable amount of grief. I'll do anything to have all my babies back.
At the heart of this tragedy is the question of what to believe. One medical expert says it's homicide.
There's no question in my mind.
So you're saying that Carol Matthey got away with murder?
Yeah, I think so.
Another expert says there's no proof of foul play.
I think it would be too simple to suggest that just because there's been a series of deaths that we can use that evidence and that evidence alone to say that someone is guilty of serial murder.
4 deaths in one family was enough to convict New South Wales woman Kathleen Folbigg, yet nowhere near enough to convict Carol Matthey. Strikingly similar cases, even the same experts, but one woman walks free, the other is sent to jail. Now Carol has given up her anonymity, joining forces with the Folbigg supporters to help free Kathleen.
I try not to cry, but it means so much.
A woman she fears was falsely accused and wrongly convicted.
It's concerning that in one place the judgment can be made that keeps someone in prison technically for 30 years, and then after that, in Carol's case, it didn't even make it to trial in the end because the judge himself said, no, we're not accepting the experts' findings.
This is Jacob and Shania and Chloe and Joshua.
It's a terrible roll call of death. From 1998 to 2003, Carol had and lost 4 babies. Such a big smile.
He was always happy.
His smile giving no hint of what was to come. Jacob was the first to die at 7 months. How did he die?
We just found him one morning. Yeah, he wasn't breathing.
2 years later, 9-week-old Chloe was found lifeless in her cot. Forensic pathologists said both she and Jacob suffered sudden infant death syndrome, known as SIDS. 2 years on, Joshua, at 3 months, stopped breathing. At the time, his death was thought to be caused by a blood infection.
We were actually shopping at the time, and came back out to the car and picked him up from the pram, and he wasn't breathing.
Less than a year later, Shania was found dead in her bed. She was nearly 3½.
I can't remember exactly what I was thinking, but I think the main thing was it can't be happening again.
Too old for SIDS, pathologists were unable to say what caused Shania's death. 4 tiny siblings lost in 5 years was shocking and remains extraordinarily rare.
Looking at the photos of your children here, it's like an album of grief.
They're still my babies. They're still, even though they're gone, they're always still going to be my babies. No matter what happens, and you can't forget anything.
The children's section of any cemetery is its saddest part. It's heartbreaking to think of mourning one dead child, inconceivable to lose 4. But over 5 years, Carol buried 2 sons and 2 daughters. She says she welcomed the autopsies of her children, wanting answers to why their lives ended so prematurely. But it was the unexplained death of Shania that finally raised questions for police and launched a murder investigation.
If you have an object like a pillow or a cushion or something like that, then you may see no signs at all.
Leading forensic pathologist Dr. David Ranson is Deputy Director of the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, based at Melbourne's morgue. It was here that he conducted the autopsy on 3½-year-old Shania.
What did you determine her cause of death to be?
Unascertained. I could not find a cause of death.
Did that raise suspicion?
Of itself, it doesn't raise suspicion. It just added to the overall issue of why had her children died. And we were looking for concrete evidence to let us know that there was something other than a natural process in order to give the investigators something to actually start investigating. And we simply were not able to find it.
Despite no evidence of foul play in any of the 4 children, the police were still convinced they'd been murdered by their mother, Carol. To prove their case, they sought the opinion of other interstate and international experts, including American pathologist Dr. Janice Ophoven.
As far as I'm concerned, there aren't any conditions that we know that could cause 4 children to die without any evidence.
Her opinion of Carol Matthey was damning.
It clearly was, in my opinion, consistent with suffocation or smothering.
Would you accept that there is no evidence of that?
I don't disagree that there is no evidence of smothering because it's well recognized that you can smother an infant without leaving a trace.
In trying to determine the innocence or guilt of a parent accused of murdering their baby, the greatest challenge for investigators is the lack of concrete physical evidence of what really caused that baby's death. Whether the baby has died of natural causes or has been deliberately smothered, the evidence is the same. Usually there is none. No markings, nothing to distinguish between SIDS and homicide. And while there is no forensic proof, there will always be lingering doubt.
I think the thing you're faced with in infants is that they often do not show at autopsy significant degrees of the natural cause of death that might have been present.
Nor do their tiny bodies bear the marks of murder if they've been smothered.
I don't know how you would ever hold a mother accountable for killing all of her babies by suffocation if you required evidence that you know would never be there. So it's in essence the perfect crime.
Have you committed the perfect crime?
No. No, and I don't know why anyone would want to murder their children, especially 4.
Did you try to suffocate Jacob?
No.
Did you kill Chloe?
No.
Did you smother Joshua in the car park?
No.
In the back of your car?
No.
Again, Carol, did you do anything to hurt Shania?
No.
But armed with the opinion of 3 medical experts, police arrested Carol in 2005 and charged her with the murder of all her 4 dead babies.
I got arrested. Just came out of the blue.
What was that moment like?
Scary.
But I mean, what is the mindset? If you haven't done anything, do you think that this is going to go on for some time, or do you think that this is going to be cleared up pretty quickly?
I'm like, okay, well, they'll question me and then I'll be home that night. But no, that night I was in jail.
Carol was held in remand for 2 months. The charges against her came at the same time New South Wales mother Kathleen Folbig lost her appeal. She too had been charged with killing her 4 babies. And like Carol, it was the damning opinion of Dr. Janice Ophoven that was critical to the police case against her.
Do I think Kathleen Folbig or Carol Matthey killed their children? Yes. I don't have any question.
In the case of Kathleen Folbig, a jury agreed, and she was sent away for 30 years. The parallels with Carol's case were striking, which had her terrified.
What was your greatest fear?
Not being let out. Yeah, being in that situation for the rest of my life, potentially. It's like, why am I here? I've done nothing wrong, and we just had to prove I was innocent.
How do you do that?
Yeah, not having anything to hide.
Coming up,
People would call me a kitty killer.
damning evidence
Police say they could hear you smothering your child.
paints Carol as a killer.
What was the state of your marriage? Were you trying to get his attention?
But is the investigation all screwed up?
Of all of the cases, that one would fit the criteria of a staged crime.
In what way?
That's next on 60 Minutes.
So is Geelong a sad or happy place for you?
A bit of both happy and sad, because this is where I had my babies and where they did spend their time.
So far from who I was.
Their time here was too short. Within 5 years, Carol Matthey lost 4 babies. That number alone, 4 children from the one family, was enough to make her guilty of murder in the eyes of many.
What was the reaction from the community after the deaths of your children?
People would call me a kitty killer and, yeah, just names like that. And it hurt a lot, which made me not want to go out, and just I sheltered myself from everyone, just stayed at home.
Carol wasn't just guilty in the court of public opinion, but in paediatric circles, so many unexplained infant deaths confirmed a common belief. The saying was, 1 SIDS death is a tragedy, 2 is suspicious, and a 3rd is murder until proved otherwise. At Carol's committal hearing, the prosecution relied on the evidence of 3 key experts, including American forensic pathologist Dr. Janice Ophoven. She said the 4th death in Carol's family cast serious suspicion over the deaths of the other 3, even though none of those deaths had raised red flags to the pathologists who conducted the original autopsies, including Dr. David Ranson. Simply, they found no sign of murder.
The question here is, do you give the benefit of the doubt to an imaginary disease, or do you look at the case that there is a condition that no one's ever seen except in these really suspicious cases where no one's ever seen a sign or a symptom of illness, and only the moms are present when they die? If that isn't enough, combined with all the rest of the information that was available in the investigation, then so be it.
Absence of any evidence does not give you the right to go down another pathway for which you have no evidence.
Even if it happens 4 times in the one family?
Even if it happens 4 times in one family, simply because you don't know what you don't know.
The case against Carol didn't only rely on medical evidence. Prosecutors alleged Carol's children were eventually killed as part of an escalating campaign of attention-seeking behaviour to save her rocky marriage to Stephen.
The police said a lot of things that weren't true.
Like what?
That I'd done this to get my husband's attention.
What was the state of your marriage?
It was all right. It wasn't exactly the perfect marriage, but whose is these days?
I mean, were you trying to get his attention and get his affection?
No.
Were you trying to keep him in the marriage?
No. No.
Were you trying to seek attention for any other reason?
No.
Police say Carol's first attempt at winning back her husband came in 1998, 4 months before the first death in the family. A mysterious fire started in one of the children's bedrooms. As the only adult in the house at the time, Carol got herself and her kids out safely. Did you start that fire?
No. No, I didn't. And I have no reason to have lit a fire. Why would I want to burn down my house?
I don't know. Unless you were trying to hurt someone, or unless, again, you're trying to seek attention. What other explanation could there be for how it was lit? Or who lit it?
I have no idea. All I know is that my children and I made it out.
But aspects of the children's deaths continue to baffle. Carol had already lost 2 babies when Joshua stopped breathing. They were out shopping. Joshua was sleeping in his pram. And despite being provided with a sleep apnea monitor, he wasn't connected to it.
And it wasn't until we got back to the car and I'd put Shania in the car and went to lift Joshua out, and he was all limp and blue around the mouth. So I yelled out.
As Carol waited for an ambulance, she says she started CPR on her lifeless son in the back of her car. Neither she nor the paramedics could save him. Can I ask, why was Joshua not connected to his monitor at that point?
It used to go off a lot at random times. It would just start beeping, and so I didn't think I'd ever need to use it in the pram, just going to do grocery shopping.
How do you feel about that decision now?
I regret not using it, but then think, because of how it used to go off all the time, would it have gone off at the right time? It's hard to say.
So you believe that Carol Matthey smothered Joshua in the supermarket car park?
Of all of the cases, that one would fit the criteria of a staged crime.
In what way?
That it's set up in order to mislead.
The death of Shania remains just as confounding. The day before she died, Shania fell from a coffee table. Carol called for the ambulance, telling the operator her daughter had stopped breathing and was unconscious. But the operator says she thought she could hear whimpering in the background. The suggestion is those sounds were coming from Shania. Police say, listening to that first call you made to the ambulance service when
Shania fell off the table, that they could hear a child in the background. Their telling of it is that they could hear you smothering your child.
Yeah, that wasn't true.
What could they hear if that's not what they heard?
I don't know. I do remember the TV was on. I was crying.
You weren't in the process of smothering your child when you rang the ambulance?
No way.
When the ambulance arrived, Shania had regained consciousness and seemed healthy. The Ambos advised Carol to take the 3.5-year-old to the doctor for a checkup. But the very next morning, she was found dead by her mother.
Again, Carol, did you do anything to hurt Shania?
No.
Did you smother her with a pillow?
No.
Did you smother her in any other way?
No.
For Dr. Ranson, no matter how bad the circumstantial case against Carol appeared, he could not find evidence she or anyone murdered the babies.
If you start with nothing, if you start with an autopsy finding which is, I do not have a medical answer for what has gone on, then falling back on information which may be unreliable, maybe something somebody else said, somebody else's inference, somebody else's interpretation of the circumstances can be an incredibly dangerous thing to do.
And so agreed Victoria's Supreme Court in 2007. The murder trial was over before it began. The judge threw out much of the medical evidence of the star witnesses, ruling their conclusions of foul play were not supported by facts. The case against Carol Matthey was dropped and she walked free.
For a mother to be accused of such a crime must have been hideous. No comment.
Did you feel at that moment that you'd been let off on a technicality, or did you believe that you were believed, that justice had been done?
Yeah, I was just glad I had a good legal team and a judge that seen that most of the police case was based on assumptions, and that medical experts can be wrong and are wrong. And I'm proof of that.
Coming up, one mother walks free, the others still in jail.
So today you still believe that Kathleen Folbigg is a serial killer?
But can Carol help save Kathleen?
If I can help in any way, I'm happy to help. That's why I'm here.
That's next on 60 Minutes.
On that last day when you were told you don't have to come back here anymore, this will not go to trial, what were you thinking? What were you feeling?
A sense of relief that we didn't have to come back anymore.
Carol, you must be so relieved. You must be incredibly relieved.
24th of October 2007, and Carol Matthey walks free. The charges of murdering her 4 babies sensationally dropped.
Yeah, it was all still overwhelming, and I guess I was glad it was over, but still, I don't know, it hadn't sunk in yet.
The judge found there was no evidence Carol was a serial murderer, but for many, the suspicion against her remained.
People interpreted that smile of yours as someone who thought they'd got away with it, that they'd tricked everybody.
I guess it was just relief that I didn't have to come back to court every day, and it was over and we could go home and grieve and try to get on with our lives.
The case against Carol Matthey in Victoria fell apart when the judge refused to allow the evidence of the key medical prosecution witnesses. He found their assumptions of smothering were not based on fact. But it was a very different story in New South Wales. The testimony of the very same experts, including Dr. Janice Ophoven, was heavily relied on to help convict Kathleen Folbigg, sentenced in 2003 to 30 years jail for killing her 4 babies. A conviction close friend Tracy Chapman still can't accept.
I believe they've made a very big mistake, but I also know equally there's forces that would like to keep her behind bars because nobody wants to admit anyone made the wrong decision.
15 years ago, it was expert findings that helped put Kathleen behind bars. Tomorrow, after intense public and legal pressure, those findings will be put under the microscope as a fresh inquiry into Kathleen's conviction begins.
I know it's not going to be easy, but knowing that we've just done the impossible is in itself amazing.
Is she nervous? Is she scared?
Oh, yeah, nervous, scared, definitely. She knows that the odds are stacked against her, I guess. It's almost a David and Goliath battle, really.
The Kathleen Folbigg and Carol Matthey cases are eerily and tragically similar.
Cheekies all the time. Anything but nose.
Like Carol, Kathleen lost 4 babies, 2 boys and 2 girls.
My baby's not breathing. Not getting any heartbeat or anything. Pardon? I don't go already. Okay.
And like Carol Matthey, it wasn't until the death of Kathleen's 4th child, Laura, that suspicion was raised by pathologist Dr. Alan Kaler that all the children had been deliberately smothered by their mother.
When Laura died, she was aged about 18 to 20 months. And that's just far too old for that death to be called sudden infant death syndrome.
And so began a 2-year serial murder investigation.
Kathy, did you kill Caleb?
No!
Did you kill Patrick?
No!
Did you kill Sarah?
No.
And did you kill Laura?
No.
With no physical evidence her children had been smothered, it was Kathleen's disturbing diaries that were considered the smoking gun of the case by police and the prosecution.
With Sarah, all I wanted was her to shut up, and one day she did. The diaries reveal a tortured mind, and I'd be very surprised if there are not millions of mothers who think like that.
Clinical psychologist Dr. Shamila Betts examined Kathleen Folbigg's entries. In 2013, she told me, in her opinion, not even Kathleen's darkest writings were enough to convict her.
She's a fairly good-natured baby, thank goodness. It has saved her from the fate of her siblings. I think she was warned.
So when she writes about her moods, making her think and do terrible things, you don't think that's an admission?
She never said anywhere in the diary of having any murderous rage. She never felt hate for those kids. Unless there's an explicit confession that I have smothered the children with a pillow, it isn't a confession.
And yes, I would have an angry thought, but it was never to harm her.
From a pathologist standpoint, based on my experience and my in-depth work with children who have been hurt and killed, this case is a serial homicide.
So today you still believe that Kathleen Folbigg is a serial killer?
Yes, I do.
Kathleen should never have been charged and brought to trial originally. I think it's a gross injustice that needs to be rectified.
Why should she have never been charged?
There's no evidence.
Social justice lawyer Michael Knott has extensively researched the Folbigg case, written an academic report on how a controversial and now discredited theory permeated the evidence.
The case is based on Meadows' cot death theory. 1 cot death is a tragedy, 2 suspicious, 3 murder. And that has been shown to be totally erroneous and without any foundation. It's unscientific, and the case is based on that.
The so-called cot death theory was a saying made famous by this man, British professor Roy Meadow. It was thanks to his theory that a number of mothers were sent to jail in the UK in the years leading up to Kathleen's trial.
It does seem absolutely extraordinary that parents could be so brutal or so cruel to their own children.
But a fundamental statistical error in Meadows' law eventually saw the theory discredited and multiple murder convictions overturned.
Sally's nightmare is over because the Court of Appeal decided she'd been wrongly convicted of killing her 2 boys
In the UK alone, 4 grieving mothers, falsely accused and wrongly convicted, walked free.
Finally today, justice has been done and my innocence has been proven.
But back in Australia, the same flawed argument was being used against Kathleen Folbig. Dr Ophoven relied on Roy Meadows' law at a pre-trial hearing, claiming the chance of 4 unexplained infant deaths from natural causes in the one family was 1 in a trillion. How do you respond to criticism that you poisoned the waters of the trial against Kathleen Folbig?
I don't know how I could do that.
That criticism refers to the fact that you declared that there was less than a 1 in 1 trillion chance that 4 deaths in one family could be attributed to SIDS.
That was incorrect. I was citing previous literature, Roy Meadow. I would never say that now, but I wouldn't change my diagnosis now. I would just say that it would be impossibly rare, but I wouldn't put a number on it.
The consequences of using these theories is we're putting innocent people in jail, and that in our society is abhorrent.
How big is the risk that Kathleen Folbig is one of those innocent people who is in jail?
I think there's a high risk. I think there's a high risk that she's totally innocent.
Coming up, if a young child is smothered, there is very rarely evidence of that.
You would usually see nothing.
Does the expert evidence stack up? So until there is proof that that child is murdered, it's still speculative, isn't it? What Kathleen's jury didn't hear. At the time of the Folbig trial, there had been at least 8 such cases around the world. And her words from prison.
Should never have happened. Maybe together, our voices may help change that.
That's next on 60 Minutes.
To wonder every day what happened. Pretty much not a day goes by that you don't wonder what happened.
2 women accused of the same heinous crimes. One is free, the other behind bars. Plagued by guilt or otherwise, both are imprisoned by a mother's grief and a community's enduring suspicion. To be accused of murdering those children, to be seen in that light, what is that like for you?
It's very upsetting, and you just constantly question yourself and why you couldn't have done more to try to find out, to try to stop it. And if they'd found anything, could they have prevented it?
It's extraordinary, the parallel circumstances, and yet the drastically different results. Carol Matthews' court case was dropped for lack of evidence, but incredibly, similar evidence saw Kathleen Folbig found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 of manslaughter. Lawyer Michael Knott believes, just as it was for Carol, there is so much reasonable doubt in the Folbig case she should never have been convicted.
From all indications, she was a good mother, and the problem you get with these type of cases is there's no evidence, there's no forensic evidence, there's no DNA evidence, there's no videotape evidence, there's a denial of the charges, and all you have eventually is speculation by medical practitioners and consequently the police, and we know that speculation is just not good enough.
Kathleen Folbig, does she deserve the benefit of the doubt?
Yeah, everybody does, definitely. As we learnt with my case, that medical experts can get it wrong and do get it wrong.
Do you believe in the Carol Matthews case that there was sufficient doubt?
Oh, no. Oh, I don't think there was doubt at all.
But the judge in the Matthews case so doubted Dr. Janice Ophoven's testimony, he wouldn't allow it to be heard. He said the conclusions of 3 of the Crown's forensic pathologists were not based on fact. But do you find it frustrating that your conclusions are still speculative because of the lack of proof?
Well, it depends on what you mean by proof.
Well, as you said yourself, I mean, if a young child is smothered, there is very rarely evidence of that. So until there is proof that that child is murdered, it's still speculative, isn't it?
I agree with you. If all you have was the physical body of a suffocated baby, you would usually see nothing, even when it's a confessed suffocation. So either you get a confession, or you can sequentially murder your babies and not have any justice for those little lives.
Or you didn't suffocate them.
Well, that's the whole question here.
Kathleen Folbig, sentenced to 30 years in jail, is a stark reminder to Carol of where she could be today. How close do you feel you got to going to jail, of being found guilty, when you consider that those experts who were ready to testify against you still believe today that you're guilty?
Like the judge said in his report, they based everything on assumptions and not facts, and that just proves that they can't just make up things, and their theory of losing more than 3 children is murder is wrong.
The inquiry reviewing the Kathleen Folbig conviction, which begins tomorrow, will be focusing on medical evidence, specifically the occurrence of 3 or more deaths in one family due to natural causes. At the time of the Folbig trial, there had been at least 8 such cases around the world, but the jury was told by medical experts that they'd never heard of such a tragedy. For Folbig's close friend, Tracy Chapman, that omission was a terrible injustice.
I think it's important to understand this does happen.
The notion of 4 babies dying in your care in an unexplained and unexpected way is too big almost to comprehend. It's too big to accept.
Well, it is horrific. It's unacceptable, like you say. But the sad thing for me is people shoot first, ask questions later. And there is reasons for this medically that we just don't know enough about yet.
Tracy believes in Carol Matthey, Australia has its own unique chance to understand the complex and unknown medical forces at play in cases of multiple infant deaths. But more personally, Carol offers Kathleen something no one else can, a deep understanding of her loss.
Well, she said nobody knows what she's feeling the way Carol Matthey does, with the grief, the pain. For Kath, it's more to say that somebody else has gone through this. It's not as unusual as it sounds. And this lady knows all too well how much pain someone feels for losing 4 children.
If the special inquiry goes her way, Kathleen may have a retrial or may even have her convictions overturned.
All I can do is stand up publicly and support her and say, I've got you. Hopefully I don't need to catch her if she falls.
Has there ever been a crack in your belief in Kathleen Folbig, a crack in your support of her?
No fault lines.
It's at this critical time for Kathleen Folbig that Carol Matthey has come forward for the first time, a mother who was also accused of killing her 4 babies. Unlike Kathleen, the medical case against her collapsed.
She could very well be innocent, and medical experts get things wrong. Police get things wrong.
These are the words Kathleen Folbig has wanted to hear for a long time. But it's only now Carol has emerged from the seclusion she chose in 2007 when the case against her was dropped.
I'm trying not to cry, but it means so much.
On Kathleen's behalf, Tracy meets Carol for the first time.
You know, when it happened to you, I read it and I just thought, how do we get in contact? But you just walked away and never surfaced again, so We've never actually been able to trace you, and I'm just so grateful this has happened.
If I can help in any way, that's why I'm here.
Tracy comes with words of gratitude from Kathleen Folbig.
I guess this is her way of touching base and saying she'd really like to connect with you because you're someone that's been with us. You don't know that, but you've been with us for a very long time. So this is her way of telling you that.
From within jail, Kathleen offers Carol her support.
You suffered feeling trapped, imprisoned at times, I'm sure of that.
And shows a determination to keep fighting.
To be persecuted as we were, and I still am. This should never have happened. Maybe together our voices may help change that. Sincerely, thank you so much, Kathleen, with a smiling face.
When you lose someone, there's not just one thing you miss most. It's just everything. You think about how old they would be now and what they would be doing, and yeah, you wonder what they'd look like.
Tired of being what you want me to be.
While Carol Matthey does have her freedom, what she'll never have are her children.
Don't know what you're expecting.
It's an emptiness she feels every day, a loss that will be with her the rest of her life.
When you go through this much pain, you would hope for sympathy, wouldn't you? Caring and understanding.
Yeah, but then you hope to just be left alone, to just grieve, and everyone deals with grief differently, so we all have our own ways. But it never stops, doesn't get any easier.
Hello, I'm Tara Brown. Thanks for watching. To keep up with the latest from 60 Minutes Australia, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can also download the 9Now app for full episodes and other exclusive 60 Minutes content.